Hi, the DEGS at North Carolina Central University offers a number of different classes. We encompass the social geography, such as introductory geography, world regional geography, as well as quantitative geography, such as GIS and geostatistics. In this particular tutorial, I'm going to talk about some travel that I did in the past, and hopefully we'll kind of talk about future travel in the future, where we talk about different qualitative and physical geography issues that we've looked at. In this particular tutorial or class, I'm going to talk about a trip that I took to Alaska and Seattle in the summer of 2016. A couple things about Alaska. I've only been there once before, and I took a cruise ship there. Alaska is the largest state in the U.S. It's more than twice the size of Texas. It was originally settled by the Russians, but they sold it to the United States in the 1860s, so it was called Seward's Folly. Seward was the Secretary of State at the time of the purchase. It's got a population about 3 times that of Durham County, so it's relatively small for this entirely large area. It's got about 1 person per square mile when we look at arithmetic population density. In terms of time zones, it's about 4 to 5 hours behind Eastern Standard Time Zone, and there's no way to drive in or out of many of the towns, and we'll look at a couple here. But the city of Anchorage is connected to mainland through Canada, but a lot of it isn't. Rent, resources, access to resources besides gas or oil is relatively high. So when I'll talk about Alaska, a single bedroom apartment in Alaska will run you about $1,000 a month. And then many people will suffer from seasonal disorders. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the actual physical geography of places where I went, where a place like Ketchikan receives about 200 inches of rain per year. But before, and I'll show you the map here of what we did. This is a map of Alaska here, so you can see the scale of it. Amazingly big here, and the area that we focused on is southeast of Alaska. Anchorage is right in the middle here, and then Fairbanks, where the University of Alaska is located, is in the interior of Alaska, where you get extremely low temperatures. But we weren't in that particular place. So when we focus in on southeast Alaska, we went to Ketchikan, Juneau, Sitka is over here, right on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, and then went to a place called Glacier Bay. But before we went there, we flew into Seattle. So we flew from North Carolina. We flew into Seattle. One thing that we all have probably heard of with Seattle is the Space Needle. This is the Space Needle. This is at a large park or area called Seattle Center. And this is about 605 feet high. And it was built, it's probably one of the most identifiable buildings in Seattle, if not the most. It was built in commemoration of the 1962 World's Fair. So you can see the Seattle Center right here. This has got places like the Experience Music Project, the Chihuly Art Museum, the Pacific Science Center. This has this large fountain right here, and we'll look at these in a little bit here. The other thing about Seattle is the physical geography of Seattle here. We flew out on a Thursday, and we were going to run the Seattle Marathon on a Saturday. So on Friday, we found a nice jogging trail so we could warm up for the marathon. One thing about Seattle is the physical geography. It's along the Cascade Mountains. Cascade Mountains are mountains that run from Northern California all the way up to the northern Washington here. In Washington state alone, there are 5 active or potentially active volcanoes, of which this is Mount Rainier, which is one of them. This is 411 feet tall. You can see this was taken in June, so you can still see the ice of this. And you can see this is about 55 miles away. The last eruptions were major eruptions, or relatively major eruptions, were in the 1850s, and they've had some intermittent ones throughout. This could potentially be active here, but you can imagine if this were to erupt, how many people this would affect. This would flash melt and literally go into the Puget Sound. This is the Elliott Bay, which is an arm of the Puget Sound that goes out to the Pacific Ocean. So people south of Seattle in Tacoma and Olympia and Auburn, there's a military base there called Fort Lewis, would be majorly affected by this. A lot of the buildings of, say, Ording and Tacoma are built on the lahars of previous eruptions of Mount Rainier. With it, going to Seattle, this is the first Starbucks here. I'm not into Starbucks too much, but we had to stop by there. I'm not sure when it was started. I think the 1970s or so, but this is at Pike Place. If you have a chance, go to Pike Place. Okay, you'll be amazed at the number of different offerings that they have here. This is a very big tourist spot here, and this is right along the bay there, probably a couple blocks off. Okay. Other thing that I thought was interesting was that people there were a little bit more advanced or maybe cognizant of green living. So you can see in a lot of the places, public places there, they have a place for compostables in addition to recycling. So these are I think paper and food and leftover food that could be used for compost, which I thought was extremely interesting here. Other thing they have there is the Chihuly Blown Glass Museum. Chihuly, he's still alive, I believe. He was a blown glass expert who studied throughout the world. But there's a blown glass museum, which is absolutely amazing. You can see here, this is just a little orb that they have here, but you can see the reflection of the Space Needle behind us. And this abuts right next to the Space Needle. So absolutely amazing museum. If you have a chance, go see it. Or if there's exhibitions around here in the summer of 2016, fall 2016, there's a Chihuly exhibit in Burlington, North Carolina, of all places. We went there, absolutely amazing. Next day, Saturday, we ran the Seattle Marathon. This was the course for the Seattle Marathon, 26-mile marathon. My wife and I ran it. Stepson ran the 13-mile half marathon. So it started up here at the Seattle Center here, right at the Space Needle, and it ended down at the baseball stadium, or CenturyLink Field, where the Seahawks play, the football stadium. It's a complex. They're all right next to each other. Most beautiful part of the course here is right along Lake Washington, around Seward Park here. I just wanted to mention that. You can see us after it. We thought it was interesting because my wife at the time works for CenturyLink, so you can see us at the end. I need to give a shout out to my wife. She qualified for the Boston Marathon. She ran 3:38:35. I ran just under 3:28. Stepson ran 1:47 for the half marathon. So we had a really good run. It's my third fastest marathon ever. Her fastest by almost 20 minutes. So we had a really good run, but we literally took a cab straight to the boat. And the first place that we stopped in about 2 days later was Alaska. Okay, Juneau, Alaska. Juneau is the capital of Alaska. It's got about 30,000 people. You can see what the streets of Juneau look like. And like I mentioned before, this is one of the towns where you can't drive in or out of. We'll look at the Mendenhall Glacier in a second, but there's a big glacier field literally behind it, so 40 miles down, the road will literally stop. So as you can imagine, any imports need to be flown in or shipped in via ship. Okay, so as you can imagine, there are going to be some necessities, pizza, bread, a lot of groceries. The prices of them are going to be much higher. You can see here, space is going to be very limited. I'm not sure what the name of this mountain is. This might be Mount Juneau here. This is about 3,000 feet tall, but space is going to be limited. So as you can imagine, rent is going to be relatively high. This area here is going to be called the Mendenhall Valley, which is a little bit further north, but this is the area where a lot of your development is. You can see Juneau, Alaska from our cruise ship here. Okay, so this is downtown Juneau, the capital of Alaska, which is hundreds of miles from Anchorage, which is the largest city. They have little excursions. I took one of the kids on a whale watching excursion here, so you can see the actual flute of the whale coming out. And then we went over to Mendenhall Glacier. This is about 12 miles north of the city of Juneau. And this is a glacier here. This has been receding about 30 meters a year for the last 100 years. So this glacier is about 12 meters long. It forms in this big ice field that prevents a lot of the vehicular transportation in and out of Juneau. But this has been retreating a lot due to global warming. 100 feet a year. So as you can imagine, this area here where we're standing was once covered up by ice a long time ago. You can see the waterfall over here where part of the glacier is coming out, or melting here. So as you get a little bit closer, you can see what this looks like. Okay, this is amazing. And then you can see the Mendenhall Glacier here. Okay, so you can see the profound effects of global warming and global climate change. The next place we went was Glacier Bay. Glacier Bay here is a little bit further north here. You can see where it is right here at the arm of Alaska. There's an area called Mount Fairweather, which is about 15,000 feet, and it's right kind of at the corner of Canada. So this is called Glacier Bay. As you can imagine, there's a lot of glaciers there. They had native people who lived in this area here, or their ancestors lived there in the 1600s, and I thought this was interesting because the glaciers actually kind of came out in the 1600s, which displaced a lot of the people to the town of Hoona on the other parts of the islands here, or the southern islands here. And then in the 1700s, these glaciers started to retreat. A couple of them in this area are actually starting to grow, but in the 1700s, they started to retreat. I thought this was interesting because this was before the Industrial Revolution, when we started to see notable increases in global temperature. So I thought it was interesting. So when we talk about global climate change, global warming, I think there's kind of a natural element that's part of it too. So I thought it was interesting, and you can see the blue lines here. You might not be able to see them as well here, but you can see the different years that they've receded. This is one of the glaciers here. You can see the moraines. I believe this is called lateral moraine. Okay, this rock and accumulation that the glacier takes with it and transports it down into the arm of Glacier Bay here. This is another glacier here. We didn't see any calving in this instance here, but this is the glacier coming out of the mountains here. Okay, I thought this was interesting. This was taken at about 10 o'clock at night. So as you go further and further north, this was taken at about the summer solstice. This was taken June 21st, 22nd. We ran the marathon on the 18th, so this is a couple days later. So this is about the longest day in Alaska, and this is taken at about 10 o'clock at night, and you can see how light it is still. I thought this was kind of interesting because we have, 18, 20-hour length days, but during the winter, it's going to be entirely opposite. So you can see people suffering from seasonal affective disorders and some of the effects of that, maybe alcoholism, suicide rates, or other types of things or disorders or instances that are going to be affected by that. Next day we went to Sitka, Alaska. Sitka was originally the capital of Alaska when we bought it from the United States. It was settled by the Russians, so you can see the Russian architecture right here. I believe this is called St. Michael's in the middle of town. Sitka has a population of about 8,800 people. I thought this was interesting here as we walked along. You can see the tsunami evacuation route. So some of the issues that we deal with in the Pacific Northwest, all the way from Northern California, all the way up through Alaska, is tsunamis. Okay, it's located at a plate boundary. So at these plate boundaries, we might have undersea earthquakes, which are going to trigger tsunamis. Okay, and typically these tsunamis won't take very long to reach the coast. So I thought this was interesting. This is a dormant volcano right now called Mount Edgecombe. You can see this from Sitka, Alaska. I think the last eruption of this was about 2200 BCE, so about 4,000 years ago. And I'll show you a map to see where this is, but you can see this is relatively dormant here. Okay. This is on a separate island from Sitka, so you can see Sitka right here. This is Mount Edgecombe right here, so you can see the contours. And it's on Krusof Island, and I believe that Sitka is on Baranof Island. And you can see the scale here, so this volcano, you can see it's probably about 15, 16 miles away according to our scale right here. Next place we went to was Ketchikan, Alaska. Ketchikan is in the very southeast of Alaska. It has about 15,000 people. And in 1949, it received 202 inches of rain per year. This area doesn't get a lot of snow. It gets a lot of rain because it's right on the ocean. So it gets a lot of that evaporation. It's right near the mountains. So you get a lot of that orographic precipitation from this cold, moist water that is kind of getting it from the Pacific Ocean. Okay, that's being evaporated from the Pacific Ocean and then immediately being deposited when it hits that orographic orography or the orographic precipitation. I thought this was neat. You can see literally these are sidewalks that go up and connect these areas. So I thought that was fairly interesting. So we went to those 4 places too. Okay, we stopped in Victoria. Okay, this is the capital of British Columbia, the Canadian province of British Columbia. This isn't the largest city. The largest city is Vancouver, which is on the mainland. But Victoria is on Vancouver Island, which is a relatively large island. And a lot of the Canadian and British influence here. When we got done, we went back to Alaska for a couple more, we went back to Seattle for a couple more days. Since we weren't in training, we stopped by this place called Biscuit Bitch. They serve a lot of biscuits, so we weren't training, so we could kind of eat to our heart's content. We thought this was kind of a neat Seattle staple. Other things we did, we went to the Seattle Mariners. Okay, they played the Cardinals that day. So we stopped by a baseball game, and this was right where we finished the Seattle Marathon week before, or I think it was 9 days before, 8 days before. So we stopped at the went to a baseball game there, and that's about it. So in conclusion, Seattle and Alaska are really neat places. They're defined a lot by their history, and defined a lot by the physical geography. Okay, you can see that distance, space, physical geography, glaciers really help guide a lot of this area. Both Seattle and Alaska were guided a lot by the gold rush in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So a lot of their history and development is dependent upon expansion to get gold. So if you ever have a chance, go check out Seattle, go check out Alaska. You'll have a great time.